What up? Once again, live in effect, we have Sun Ray, aka Amadeus Smoke Side, up in effect. Just coming across with another stream as I've seen continued deaths of Indigenous Australians while in police or prison custody. So, without further ado, I will play a few streams which I have seen from news clips, and we will go from there.
Auntie Sherry was an energetic woman. She was always on the go. Growing up, she was just an auntie. But it was in the later life that I appreciated her ability to do her own thing, live life, and, enjoy it.
Nathan was the best big brother anyone could have, best son, best grandson, and best father. He was counting down to his release. He said, "I'll see you guys in 2 weeks," and that 2 weeks never did come. It's hard for anyone to lose anyone unexpectedly, but it's harder when they're alone. And he was alone.
She died in custody, and then that roll-on effect of what we were about to face. That was the most scariest part for me.
Across the country, First Nations families are united by grief.
It was hard to really acknowledge her death as a human, because it was already forced into that Black Deaths in custody scenario.
Let's get that message out there. Enough is enough. Australia will not tolerate anymore.
6 months after his auntie died in a Brisbane police cell, Darren Brady finds himself on the front line of a protest movement.
Growing up, I remember, as a family, we would always be a part of those spaces. Those protests, we were always there, but always in the back. And then it was interesting to see how we were literally forced, you could feel it. We were forced to be right there at the front.
5 Aboriginal people in the last 4 weeks. 4 weeks!
Nationwide, people are taking to the streets. It's a new generation with a decades-old message. In the 80s, a similar movement was gaining traction.
About 200 people took part in the march, which started in the inner city suburb of Redfern.
There was a whole lot of anger across Australia in Aboriginal communities. Many of the leaders were a bit obviously frustrated and perplexed because the number of deaths that were occurring seemed to be all occurring in police custody. People were starting to believe that the police were killing people.
Any inquiry which did not have the status of a Royal Commission would be unacceptable.
When Bob Hawke announced a Royal Commission in 1987, it was supposed to be a turning point. Labor Senator...
Okay, yeah, just as mentioned, that was the former Prime Minister of Australia. So let's say more than 30 years ago, seeing this supposed situation as a problem and trying to, begin the Royal Commission into looking into the circumstances and what can be changed. And obviously subsequently there's still been over 450 deaths. It's quite alarming the rate that it's occurring. It's kind of, if you average it out, once every month, but I'll let this continue. And
It's a new generation with a decades-old message. In the
city suburb of Redfern.
In Aboriginal communities. Many of the leaders were a bit obviously frustrated and perplexed because the number of deaths that were occurring seemed to be all occurring in police custody. People were starting to believe that the police were killing people.
Any inquiry which did not have the status of a royal commission would be unacceptable.
When Bob Hawke announced a royal commission in 1987, it was supposed to be a turning point. Labor Senator Pat Dodson was one of the commissioners.
What is the obligation of a prison officer, police officer, or a nurse or a doctor or someone who takes, if you're in care, if you're in custody, what are the obligations you have to that person in custody? So because that was not understood.
More than 450 First Nations people have died in custody since the inquiry delivered its findings, 5 since the start of last month. These are just some of their faces. The inquiry made more than 300 recommendations. A review found around 2/3 have since been implemented. But many of the recommendations remain overlooked, including hanging points in some prison cells, arrests for minor offences like swearing, and the granting of bail.
If the political leadership at the top doesn't get itself into gear very shortly, we're going to have a real crisis on our hands, similar to what we had back at the time of the calling of the Royal Commission.
We're not in a national crisis in the sense of people dying because of the actions of a prison guard or a police officer. Where we do have the crisis is the underlying issues that impact the rates of incarceration.
First Nations people made up around 14% of the prison population in 1991. Today, it's 29%. So we're getting up towards 1 in 3 of all prisoners in Australia are Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people.
Some people might hear those statistics and say, if you don't want to go to prison, don't commit the crime. How would you respond to that argument?
It's not about the rate of crime. It's about governments relying on punitive approaches to law and order, relying on the prison, and the result of that is that the poor and marginalised and racialised groups like First Nations people are the fodder that end up behind prison bars.
We will never, ever be the same. It's changed like the path that we're on completely. It's been nearly 4 years in December and it feels like yesterday.
Tanya Day was arrested after falling asleep on a train while intoxicated. She hit her head in a police cell and later died in hospital.
I'm furious that we still need to be having these discussions and that, you know, like while we're trying to like advocate for mum and for other mob and trying to grieve, you know, we have another death in custody and it's like the strikingly similar.
The coroner found Tanya's death could have been prevented if she hadn't been arrested. After a family-led campaign, Victoria decriminalised public drunkenness this year.
The rest of Australia has just like got this blindfold on that they just don't want to see it. The governments don't see it. The police don't. It's not like I want to wake up every day and be doing this sort of work, but I don't actually have a choice.
The country's track record on Indigenous incarceration is now attracting global attention.
The economic indicators, the social indicators, the indicators regarding death in custody for Indigenous people, all of those are painting such a dismal picture of the situation of Indigenous people. No one should be prepared to just turn away from it, turn their eyes away from it because it has been there forever. No, we now need to make it a priority and tackle it forcefully with all the resources that are required.
30 years on, there's not much change.
Pat Dodson wants a national plan to drive change, led by the Minister for Indigenous Australians, Ken Wyatt, and peak First Nations groups.
You would think that this would be a trigger for those entities to be brought together by someone and say, we've got a crisis on our hands. How do we deal with this?
Well, we do that through the 51 peak organisations already. They help co-design the targets for the Closing the Gap. Target 10, which looks at adult incarceration rates, and Target 11, which is juvenile incarceration rates.
Black lives don't matter, and that's what the marches were about. They're expendable. We've got to realise that this is happening to human beings.
I would love Nathan to be remembered as the person he was. I feel like he's still with us and around us, and I feel like I'm doing it for him, and I don't want to let him down.
I believe in, this space enough that Australia, we can do this to now move forward positively and successfully to achieve no deaths in custody. It just sucks that we have to we have to fight and not just be somebody who can enjoy life more.
Okay, so some poignant points that came out of there, I would definitely say the percentage, like it was the gentleman saying it rose from 14% to 29% now of the prison population is Indigenous. Also, the fact to highlight would be that the Australian population percentage of Indigenous makeup was approximately, it's under 3%, and another, the obligation that is, upon the particular officers in these situations. What do they have to these human beings, as he said? Now, also another, kind of devastating fact there was that 5 deaths occurred within 1 month. I've got a couple of other videos here to continue, and then I'll continue to talk about it, but we'll go with this one.
These walls is out of sight, and if the corrections boss had his way, out of the public's mind.
2 deaths in 1. The performance of Waltham's call for, guess what, miraculously.
No, excuse me. No, a bit of a
What
mistake
happens
there.
behind these walls is out of sight, and if the corrections boss had his way, out of the public's mind.
2 deaths in 1 week, and you decide not to tell the public.
Most tragically, and yes, I have not informed the public, I have informed all the oversight bodies.
Budget Estimates has revealed a 44-year-old Indigenous woman died by an apparent suicide at Silverwater Women's Prison on Friday. And days earlier, a 35-year-old Indigenous man died in the Long Bay Prison Hospital.
I'm not across the detail of the exact medical condition that required him to be in the Long Bay Hospital.
You don't know whether or not he was in the hospital for treatment for mental health conditions. Seriously, Commissioner?
I understand there were multiple issues.
Yeah, but I've asked you a specific question.
24 people have died in custody across the state since July last year. 3 of the deaths were classified as unnatural causes. 4 of the prisoners who've died were Indigenous Australians.
Just seems incredible to me that these were not made public.
Commissioner Severin says doing so would cause angst and grief.
It would not be helpful if we simply put media statements out or public announcements out on any deaths in custody.
It's been 30 years since the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody handed down its findings. Some of its recommendations still haven't been implemented, including identifying all hanging points in cells, which can be used for self-harm.
There is no dedicated budget for removing hanging points. It is part of risk-based approach to modifying cells where that is necessary.
The recommendations have been cherry-picked at best. It is not good enough.
The coroner is investigating the most recent tragedies. Nakari Thorpe, ABC News, Sydney.
Right, and again, from the similar issues, I mean, the fact that the commissioner was unwilling to be truthful with his and bear complete truth to the public, I think in apprehension of the following situation, saying that it would be harmful to the circumstances. I mean, I think that's quite horrendous in itself. And it was good to see that the commissioner, or the adjudicator, was kind of not sympathetic with that, and trying to say, "Are you serious with, you didn't realize he was in there for mental health situations." Now, also the hanging points. I mean, these are positions where people can obviously, bind them to kill themselves, and this is simple things where they could be stopped, and this has taken 3 decades for this to fall through. But here's the last video that I'll put through.
William Crowther holds a prominent place in history as Tasmania's 15th Premier. He has a dark past, known to have mutilated the body of an Aboriginal man. There are different sides to history, and the statue is being used to represent it.
It might be provocative, but that's what it's all about, to wake up people to make sure that this is recognised as a wrongdoing to our people.
Aboriginal artist Alan Mansell has transformed the statue of William Crowther into William Lanny, the Aboriginal man whose remains Crowther desecrated.
The red head was brought about because William Lanny's head was dismembered after he was dead, and then they took his hands.
It's the first of 4 temporary artworks, all with input from Aboriginal artists, that aim to tell a more complete picture of Tasmania's past.
The council decided that it wanted to have a year-long conversation about this statue and about this chapter of Hobart's history.
The council wants community feedback on the artwork to help form a long-term response to the controversial statue, but it won't commit to permanently removing it, something the Tasmanian Aboriginal Centre has wanted for years.
We support Aboriginal artists having the opportunity to explain the offensiveness of the statue, but we are still waiting for the Hobart City Council to commit to its removal.
Each of the artworks will be displayed for up to 2 months. Sarah Jane Bell, ABC.
So, in the highlight of that, I mean, that was just the kind of the newest news story that I've come across now. I mean, it's just a blatant, for me, I'd just like to feel your comments, your thoughts on this situation. I mean, to me, it's horrendous. It's just a major problem. These people in positions of power who have gone through training, received their, positions of qualifications of authority. And it's a kind of like, obviously people are aware of the systemic nature within these police forces, within the prison force, when they are employed in there. But that's still, for me, no excuse for the behaviour to continue, unless it is a want and a need, and it is part of the agenda, or it's part of the mission statement. But obviously underlying, it won't be written blatantly, but I obviously don't have the answers, but I'm just trying to highlight these situations, and because I feel they still need to be, because what will it take beyond a Royal Commission to bring about some changes to these circumstances? It's terrible, loss of life, the amount of loss of life in conditions faced. It's just who is to who's holding the blame? What sort of things can we do to fix this situation, or bring about some sort of justice? Then it's really, it's in our hands. It's in our hands. It's up to the people. You've got to just stand back, take a look, find your direction, follow that path, and just take your stance and be proud of it, stand behind it, and then hopefully we can all live as humans in harmony with this earth. So It's just a quick one summary, signing out. Much peace to everybody.